we're talking about product market fit and we're looking backwards and we see how Scribe has grown. Was it obvious or was it more nuanced than that?
No, it was not obvious. I had investors, I had early supporters who called me and said, "You're throwing the company away. You're making a huge mistake. I'm going to write this off to a zero in my mind, basically." And I had to politely say to them, I have different information than you do. This is asymmetric information exchange. I'm talking to users. You're not. And so, I'm going to go forward and do this anyways. But even internally, we had set some milestones for ourselves where we were like, okay, after we release this, we want to see X number of downloads, Y amount of engagement in the product. And we're going to use those as decision points. And I remember we'd set August 31st, if we don't hit this, drop dead, we're going to kind of stop this Scribe experiment. And we hadn't hit the numbers by August 31st. I just looked at the team and I was like, we have to do this anyways. As I just feel it. The N might not be there, but the passion behind the people who have engaged with us is there. We have touched on something. There's a nerve, there's a real pain underneath this. And this is what we need to do.
Jennifer, I've been so excited for this episode. I feel like every time I hear you talk about Scribe, I learn something new. Thank you for coming on.
I'm excited to be here.
I've heard you say before, I don't know, put words in your mouth, but I've heard you say before that you had a professor in business school who said to find the thing about yourself that you're always apologizing for and build a career around it. And for you, that seems to be productivity and efficient allocation of time and talent. That's not usually how people procrastinate. So I've never actually asked you why. Why is productivity the thing that makes you happy? Where does that come from?
I've asked myself the same question, and I don't have, you can keep asking why. Pick any trait about yourself and, continue asking why. And at some point you hit a dead end and you're like, I don't know, I'm just freaking wired this way. And so, I go down the chain, but that's sort of the eventual end of it. I thought I was going to be an economist for a while. I was really interested in economics in high school, in a really nerdy degree. I used to cut class when the jobs report would come out because I was studying the data, that level. I competed in some economics competitions and whatnot. But anyways, economics is really all about markets, right? And market clearing between supply and demand. And the beauty of markets is in the right context, done the right way, they provide a really efficient allocation of whatever that's a market for, right? It could be goods, could be services, could be talent, could be ideas. And so I think I've always been drawn to just this idea that there is a perfect Pareto optimal allocation of things in a market clearing way, this kind of pure economic idea. And of course, a lot of economics, that doesn't actually map up with the way that the world works at all, right? And I think it's that discrepancy sometimes that just really kind of bothers me and gnaws at me. And for whatever reason, it's particularly around efficiency and productivity and the allocation of people's time and talent against the things that are going to be the highest calling, highest value for that person. And if you look at the way that most 9 to 5 is spent today in corporate America and really around the world, it is not market clearing, efficient allocation at all, right? People spend their time on all kinds of things that are not their best, highest calling, things that they enjoy doing, things that they're uniquely good at, et cetera. And that problem's just always really bothered me. And, I bring it back to your kind of your original prompt about, my professor in business school at the time. So he said, find the thing about yourself you're always apologizing for, and then find a way to get paid for it. And at the time, it sort of flew in one ear and out the other. I kind of dismissed it and moved on with my life.
Pretty good advice.
Yeah, it's great advice. Now that I'm older and I kind of reflect back on it, and I certainly look at my own career arc and what I'm doing with Scribe, and I've taken this obsession with efficiency and now channeled it into a company, maybe even kind of subconsciously at first, and then it became conscious. But it is true. You could say it's either, one of my great traits, or if you ask my husband, a serious character flaw where it drives him crazy that I'm constantly trying the most efficient way to do anything, any kind of task that we're confronted with. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I think if you look at people who are at the top of their craft, they've found a way to take something that, is really spiky about them that others might complain about, or that is a weird part of the way that they're wired and scratches an itch for them in some way that they just can't even explain, a compulsion to do something. And they turn it into something productive. So I think a lot of like crafts, like really top craft, comes from like a compulsion that maybe you can't even fully explain why. It just is what you do.
Okay, I love this Jennifer lore and where the obsession for productivity maybe not came from, maybe it was always there innate, but the ways that it surfaced in different ways over time. And so when thinking about Scribe, you built a company around this and you said maybe it was subconscious and it moved to conscious. So let's talk about the process of it going from subconscious to conscious. You started as a consultant, and that's where a lot of the seeds of Scribe were planted. So tell me a little bit about what you did as a consultant and how that turned into, or if it turned into an aha moment to eventually start a company.
Yeah. So I spent 7 years at McKinsey, like flying around the country, like 200 plus days a year on a plane, going to places like Salt Lake City and Tampa into these really big operation centers. I did a lot of org and ops work for mostly financial services firms and technology companies. So that meant going to these ops centers and trying to figure out ways to make them more efficient. And the trick you learn pretty quickly is you find the best person in that ops center and you just befriend them and you ask them, why are you better than everybody else? And this was 15 years ago. I'll date myself a little bit. They'll pull out a really thick binder with laminated pages of step-by-step guides. And they would say, I was told to memorize this and just do this. But like, I don't do it that way anymore. I actually found, these 50 shortcuts or something. And so I would pull up a chair, me and my team, and look over their shoulder and observe the way that they worked and write down and basically create a new step-by-step guide binder and give it to the head of that ops center and say, here, if you can get everybody in this ops center to do what this best person is doing, you're going to raise the performance of this entire team. And particularly in very measured environments like call centers and ops centers tend to be, there's very measurable gains in productivity, savings, et cetera, et cetera. And like, oh, by the way, that's $1 million a month or something like that for that engagement. And that always seemed really crazy to me at the time that was the state of the art best practice to hire this like 27-year-old with a Lenovo ThinkPad to like look over someone's shoulder and write down what they already know how to do and just disseminate it to everybody else. And I always thought to myself, like, someone will like solve this someday. Like, this is not going to be the best practice status quo forever. And then I kind of moved on with my life, and I found myself in venture capital. And I live here in Silicon Valley. We obviously talk a lot about how to sell software, right? Like that's what we build businesses on. But I got really curious about why people buy software. Maybe it was the former consultant in me. I don't know. I've always I think really sympathized and empathized and felt kinship with people who are operating in big companies. And so I interviewed over 1,200 CIO, CTO type folks. And I would just ask them, like, what are you trying to solve for? Like, what problems are keeping you up at night? What do you have budget for? What do you wish Silicon Valley was building and investing in? And I heard the same theme come up. They'd use different words to describe it, but they all said something around like, look, I have all these people who show up to work every day and their fingers on keyboard, like trying to create value for the company. And I see what goes in. I see the software that I buy for them, the tools I buy for them, the salaries I pay for them. I see what comes out that ops center in Tampa and that ops center in Ohio. By the way, they do the same thing. They have very different outcomes. Like why? I don't know. But I can't ever observe that transformation of work, like how things are actually getting done, unless I literally have that, consultant looking over their shoulder or ask that person to like write down what they know how to do. And so that kind of like flipped me from, well, someone will do something about this someday to like, okay, I want to do something about this. Like, is anybody doing something about this? And looking around and seeing like, is there something I can join that's like solving this problem? And I didn't find anybody doing it the way that I thought it should be done. And so then I like finally flipped to like, okay, well then I'm going to do something about it. But it was a very circuitous journey. That's not a linear path from moment to company created.
Yeah, I don't think you set out to be a CEO when you started this journey.
No, not at all.
You said that you couldn't find anyone working on the problem the way that you thought it should be solved. So at that initial stage when you went out and said, I'm going to do this, how did you think it should be solved?
So there's a bunch of like adjacent categories, I would say, of software that's trying to solve a fundamental problem of like, how do we get humans to their highest expression of time and talent? Like, that's the thing I really care about. So I view it in that frame. Like, how do we get it so when someone sits down to do work, they're doing their highest expression, like the thing that they are best at, that they are unique at, that is truly human and special to them, their craft, what they love to do, what's really valued by their company. And if you look at the percentage of time that any professional spends actually doing those things, it varies by role, but it's not 100%. It's probably nowhere close to 100%. And for some, it's actually like a very small minority percentage of their time. And so there's, a number of different fields, I think, related to that are trying to think about how you make people more productive. And that means different things in different contexts and in different industries, but just this idea of like getting people to their highest expression. So you've got like knowledge management on one hand, which is like, how do we give people the knowledge that they need to be able to do their work, or the context at least. And then you've got, digital adoption platforms, which would say, how do we make it so that you know how to use this software or tool that maybe you've never seen before and you can do it for the first time. And then, back when we started, in particular, RPA was very buzzy. Then you have RPA that's like, well, we'll actually take away some of the work that's like not your truest, highest expression calling, right? That can be automated. We'll automate that part away so you can spend your time doing other things. And then you have, I'll call more like communications tools. Think like Slack as an example, Notion, others. Notion maybe kind of goes across a couple of those categories. That just make it really easy for you to collaborate with other people, like in pursuit of those things. And I agree with the underlying sort of why. If you keep digging to our question before, like if you keep digging like under why do any of these categories matter? It's ultimately so that people can be using their time and talents in the best ways, right? And so like I agree with that in a fundamental level. But if you look at the way that all of those kind of like categories and like the players within them, the software vendors, focus on solving the problem, it's still incredibly high friction. It's taxing to the users in its own right. And it doesn't, and like the part of the stack that they're focused on is answering sometimes some very important questions. But I found that there's a really big freaking gap, which is the how. Like, how do I actually do work, right? You think about the best LMS tools, knowledge management tools, like never forget the time and dare I say pain that it takes to like even document and create content in those platforms and get them to write. But let's just assume for a second that was really, really easy and they had solved that, right? Which they haven't. But let's assume they had solved that and then gotten that in. Like, it still doesn't usually answer the question for like, okay, sit down at my computer and I go to do work. Like, how do we do this thing here? How do I use this tool in the right way? How does our team create unique value using the tools that we have and the knowledge and the expertise that we have? And so, like, to me, that's where the rubber hits the road. I'm like a very practical person. And so like, to me, the how is like actually one of the most important questions, not the most important question when you're going to work every day is like, how am I going to actually do this thing? Um, and none of those, none of those categories purport to do that. And so the gap that I saw was like, we need to make this really, really frictionless and easy to capture this content and get it to the right people. And then B, we need to focus on the right kind of content that's actually going to help them when they go to sit down and do their work. And I think it's this big overlooked missing category of how. And so it was the nexus of those things together where I looked at it and said like, I agree with everyone's trying to do, but not the way that they're going about it. Nobody's attacking this in the right way. And that's why I would say maybe a kind of spicy take, like all of those fields are kind of like fields of broken promises. If you talk, yeah, if you talk to a lot of customers, like I don't think they would say their problems are solved.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they're also, to your point, they're adjacent categories. So they are not solving for the core of if you peel the onion of the why. Maybe communication does get better, but that doesn't solve the beginning of the onion that we talked about.
Right.
Okay. So you said, I see this gap. No one is solving it the way that I want to solve it. What happens between that and you actually finding product market fit for Scribe? Because I know that even though you had this conviction, there were some changes at the beginning. You focused more on top down and then you focused on a more bottoms up motion at some point in time. So how did you know that, yes, you heard from people that they want this. Yes, it's a problem. You're excited about it. But when do you feel product market fit from the market? What did that look like?
Oh, it was linear, obvious, and speedy. Like it is for everybody. No, I mean it was not that way at all, right? You have this idea, you start off, and it's true probably for any company, and it's just the question of like how dislinear, how unspeedy, how non-obvious is it for you to get there? We had this idea of like, here's what we want to solve for people. We originally said, we're gonna watch you do work. We're gonna automatically capture what you know how to do. And then we're gonna build an automation that replicates what we saw you do. So it pulls away those parts of the job that are not, again, the use of kind of your highest expression of talents and time. And we started selling it off, top down. I have kind of a background in enterprise sales. I love enterprise sales, really enjoyed that. And took it to a few customers and had some of them say to us, like, pretty clearly, like, hey, the automation part's like good, that's fine. But actually the most valuable thing to me, if you can help me understand how my people are spending their time and document like what they know how to do and get that information to others who need to do it too. Like, no one's selling me that right now. And that's actually a really big gap. Like, if you can help my people be better at what they do, that's a big step change in my business. And like, that's a completely overlooked area today.
I would argue more similar to your original insight too.
Yeah, it probably is.
Like there's a software layer, if you can automate it all away and everything will be easier, but it's closer to your original insight.
Yeah, because it's closer to the human, which is what I've realized is kind of most important in all of this. And we had some customers too, who are just like, hey, we're only going to buy that first part. Like, I don't need that second part. Like, just give me that first part. And so we looked at it and said, like, gosh, this feels like this is a very natural bottoms up product. And so we said, all right, we're going to release this on Product Hunt and we're just going to see if anybody cares. We literally packaged up the thing we had like built for ourselves internally. And we were like, okay, we're just going to like release this in the world and see if people cared. And it turned out they did. Or they say, like, if you're not embarrassed by your first product, you spent too much time on it. Ours was the clunkiest, ugliest thing you could possibly imagine. It wasn't even web connected. I mean, really, we pull it out every year. We celebrate Scribe Day, which is our anniversary. And every year we pull it out and we show the team screenshots for people who weren't here back then. And like, you can see they all shudder when they look at it. Like the design team was like averting their eyes because they're like, we had no part in that. It truly was the most MVP you could possibly imagine a product to be. But we had, I don't want to say like blogs in 10 different languages, like start writing about it. And then we had people sending us like feedback every day. Like we saw more and more downloads come in and we saw people send us long notes of like, here are all the things that I would love to see in this product. And so the numbers were really, really small, but it felt like we had touched on a nerve that people cared enough to like write about it, to send us really long, some of them almost like essays about like what they would want to see in the product. And so we said, all right, like this is it. This is the thing that we need to focus on. And it's like very natural in a bottoms up way. And so then we spent years and still to this date, like really investing in that bottoms up product led growth motion, where the core is solving like a real pain point for an end user. And focusing on end user value and end user love, and really that magical moment and moments in the product, which is very different than how most people build enterprise software.
Well, it's very different. And I'm curious also if it was obvious at the time. Like you see that people are writing blogs in different languages and something, we're talking about product market fit and we're looking backwards and we see how Scribe has grown. But like you said, you have this love for enterprise sales. You're good at the top-down motion. Was it obvious? Was it like we hit something here and we know we need to make that shift in focus? Or was it more nuanced than that?
No, it was not obvious. When we decided to do this, I had investors, I had early supporters who called me and said, "You're throwing the company away. You're making a huge mistake. I'm going to write this off to a zero in my mind, basically." And I had to politely say to them, like, I have different information than you do. Like, this is asymmetric information exchange. I'm talking to users. You're not. And so, like, I'm going to go forward and do this anyways. But even internally, we had set some milestones for ourselves where we were like, okay, after we release this, we want to see X number of downloads, Y amount of engagement in the product. And we're going to use those as like decision points. Like if we hit that number, then this is going to become the focus. And then if we don't, we will reevaluate. We didn't hit those numbers. We came kind of close, right? We didn't completely whiff, but we didn't hit those numbers. And I remember we'd set like August 31st, like if we don't hit this, drop dead, like we're going to kind of stop this Scribe experiment. And we hadn't hit the numbers by August 31st. I just looked at the team and I was like, we have to do this anyways. As I just feel it, like just the N might not be there, but like the passion behind the people who have engaged with us is there. Like we have touched on something. There's a nerve, there's a real pain underneath this. And like, this is what we need to do. And we did it. Like they saw the same things I did. And so maybe they're a little more nervous about it than I was, but like we did it. September 1st came and like that's it. We went forward and never looked back. And then you feel more and more of the pull over time as you build into it. And so I would say product market fit feels, at some point it feels incredibly obvious. But like the first moment of it, in retrospect, you'll be like, so obvious. In the moment, there could be so many logical reasons you convince yourself that that's not what it is, that I think it has to be, on some levels, like a gut intuition. Just like, do you feel something being pulled from you?
And I think people don't talk about that a lot, because when you see product market fit and you see the numbers go up and to the right, it's that initial moment where you're making decisions that...
Oh, there's like we did the surveys, we have a methodology for knowing whether we found, and like those things are good. We did those things too to validate it after we had the feeling. But like the feeling is the leading indicator.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the feeling, like you talked about, is based on very user-centric. The people who are excited, even if it's not millions of people yet, the people who are excited are very excited and they care a lot about this and it is transforming their work. So, we are here to talk about AI too. And I know that you're always thinking, how does this help users in really every decision that you're making? So you already have a thriving business. At which point in time do you decide it's worth my time to also start making investments in AI?
It's funny because if you were to ask a lot of our users, even before our first introductions of LLM into the product, and like we use computer vision and other kind of techniques before, but when you say AI, I think you mean like LLMs and like what's happening now. So even before we brought, kind of a first introduction of LLM into the product, which we've had now for, gosh, a couple of years at this point almost. If you'd asked our users, they would have said we're AI. Because to them, for a lot of them, like our users are kind of Main Street America. We've got a lot of people in Silicon Valley, obviously, but we look kind of representative of the US economy. It's a lot of people outside of tech too who are users. And so they don't really care like what's behind the hood. They just care about what their experience is. And to them, AI is something that's like magical, that creates something that's generative. It took a blank slate and it made something generative that was a useful output. And so that feeling of a scribe watching what you do and like automatically generating a step-by-step guide, like felt like AI to them. So we've been called AI for even longer than we've technically had LLMs into the product. Once I'm sure everybody has like their memory of the first time that they like used ChatGPT or similar. Like I remember the first time that I used it. And like, you look at this and there's no way that you can look at that and unsee it. You're like, this is gonna change the world, right? It's gonna change the world. Like there's a before and an after. Like this is a kind of a clear demarcation. And the question is just how fast is it gonna come? And like, and what's it gonna change first? And then like, what does that cascading set of events look like? And so there were some pretty natural places for us to build it in pretty quickly into the product. Things that we had wanted to have as experiences in Scribe that were just technically much harder for us to do. So, for example, like I described that aha moment when you create your first Scribe, you hit the stop recording button, of having it watch the process that you're doing. And then, 2 seconds later, boom, that step-by-step guide appears. We have something in the product called Pages where you can put collections of scribes together. You can add a bunch of content, context, think word editing, video, images, et cetera, organize it all together. That still suffered from the blank slate problem. Similar to creating a Word doc, any kind of like, word processing thing where you have to go in and create it from scratch. And so we were able to look at that and say, like, oh my gosh, LLMs can really change the user experience of creating a page now. And we can bring that aha magic moment from the core Scribe creation to creating a page now. That's something we had wanted to do for a long time and just couldn't, given kind of like the technical limitations. And so there were a bunch of examples of things like that we were able to build into the product pretty early that frankly felt pretty seamless for our users. I think they would have just said, wow, this got more powerful, not, oh my gosh, this suddenly became AI. And I think in many ways, that's the right way to do it. A lot of the AI stuff that we talk about in Silicon Valley, I think is really interesting from a technical perspective. And you can squint and see how it's going to change the world. But there's like a big jump to understand, like, what is this going to do for like the average person in Acme Corp right now?
Yep.
Right. And like, we think now about, yes, what is it we're able to do? And we are doing some really interesting things on the technical side with AI. But then we also think about, well, how do we build this into the product now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now? So like that user within Acme Corp is going to have a better experience. They're going to be able to do the greater expression of their time and talents in the way that they work.
So tactically, how does that happen on your team? Do you build out, for some of these examples that you talked about, do you build out a specific AI team that focuses on it? Do you make sure that your organization is caught up and has AI as part of their toolkit when they own different areas of the product? Is it both?
Yeah, it's both. It depends. It depends which part of the stack you're talking about, right? You kind of need different things for different. But I think it'd be super disingenuous if you were like, we have an AI strategy and therefore we have an AI team and like they're the ones who own it and they're just doing this thing over here, right? Because then like you're not an AI company at that point. Like you're just kind of bolting something on. And by the way, we see that with a lot of kind of the legacy players today. And I totally understand how you get there, but I think for a company of our stage, that's not the right way to think about it. And so it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about doing research, yes, like we have a separate team that does like they are ML PhDs. And this is what they do. But if you're talking about like, how do you actually build that into product and think about what an end user experience looks like? I think that has to be built into your product teams, into your design teams, into your engineering teams, not isolated as a separate user AI experience. Like we orient our teams very much around like the parts of the product and thinking about it from a user's perspective. And so AI is no different there when it comes to the product side of it. Again, the research is going to be different.
So let's talk for a second about the research team. There are many organizations shipping great AI features. What inspired investment in a research team? And what are they most focused on today? I actually just read Scribe Agent, so we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So, we have a pretty unique position that we play in our users' workflows because we work across their applications. There's actually very few tools you use that are application agnostic that will kind of follow you across ecosystems and help you be better at what you do when you're doing that work. And that means that we have, I think a pretty interesting data set in understanding how you work, how your team works, how your company works, the way that you use your tools and the right configuration to create value there. And so we got really curious about the question of, well, what happens when we're able to take that insight and that data and use it in a more predictive sense, applying LLMs. What can we do in terms of accuracy of those models? All in pursuit of like, again, how do we bring that back to end users to make their workflows better and help them be better at what they do? And so we started off with a small research team trying to answer that question. And the answer is actually incredibly valuable. And it means that we're potentially able to bring a lot more value to helping users when they go to do something and guiding them through how to do that. If we have seen that from them or other people on their team, or maybe even kind of other people similar to them before. And we felt that was something that like we're pretty uniquely positioned to do. I really only want to do things if we're uniquely positioned to do it because of the role that we play in our users' lives and sort of like the privileged access that they've given us and making us part of their workflows. And so we said like, okay, well, let's explore like what's even technically possible, and then what could this look like from a user experience perspective? Because I think that's the other big open question. Whenever you talk about bringing AI to productivity and workflows, like I think it's really easy for us to all talk about this sort of like pie in the sky. Imagine, like the robots just can do everything you don't want to do, and like you're going to be on the beach sipping a margarita, and there's a bunch of steps between here and there, and what does that ideal experience look like for Cindy at Acme Corp sitting down to her computer this time next year in 2025, right? Like, what's that experience look like? And so that's the question that we're now anchored on, and taking the technical research that we've done and turning it into something that like actually is going to matter for Cindy.
Yeah, I saw the recent Scribe agent publication. Essentially is you take this real world Scribe web workflow data, you adapt general purpose open source LLMs into specialized agents, and then they outperform traditional agents that use proprietary models like GPT-4 or O1 Preview. I think there were a few things there. One is actual ability to parse things like HTML. The other is, like you said, all of the data, all of the Scribe data that you have that's proprietary and that's different because it's across workflows, across tools. I'm curious, as this AI becomes more sophisticated, how do you see the balance shifting between human know-how and AI-generated knowledge?
AI is only as good as what it's seen, right? Or like what it understands. I mean, until you sort of get to, AGI in a different world. But it's really good for answering generalized questions. Like, how do I reset my password for X application? Like AI will be really great within the realm of how questions, which I think is what you're talking about, right? How do I? What's much harder for it to do is to understand the context of like what's in your head bar about the way that like you do work in conjunction with your colleagues on your team. And one of the things that we've come to really appreciate is that work is very team specific. You can have two teams at competitors who have the same mandate, they're doing the same work, they have the same software stack, but they do things differently just because of who they are. Like this is the way that we do things here. I think it's hard for AI to be able to like know that in the absence of really observing you do that or having you provide that context or that data in some way. And so I think there will always be a world where it's still, how do we do this thing here? Right. And maybe it's how do we use these AI agents better, like as this team, like what that, the what of what you're doing is going to evolve over time. But I think there's always going to be that question of like, how do we do this specifically here? That's going to require some kind of context for AI to be able to work alongside you on it. And like today, that context still has to come from a human.
How do you see Scribe's role evolving in the next year as AI continues to transform workplace learning and documentation? I'm sure it's quite hard to predict because things are moving so quickly, but I'm curious how you think about your role in the next year.
It's leading the charge in the way that I'll go back to Cindy at Acme Corp, pick somebody else, right? But the way that, knowledge workers are doing work. We have some examples of Fortune 100 customers where we were the first introduction of AI into their four walls. And so stories like that are really interesting to us because we're a part of bringing this, to the way that people work every day. I think we've done surveys of our users even, maybe 9-12 months ago. And the majority of them used ChatGPT personally, like in some, not in an official capacity at work, but like they had it open and they were using it either for personal reasons or for professional reasons on a weekly, if not daily basis. And so it's something that, I think we've gotten used to now, but is still pretty limited in the way that it, has changed how we do 9 to 5. At least it's unevenly distributed. Right. And, as like we figure out, what this actually means for workflows, like you're going to just see it become a bigger and bigger part of people's lives. And so I'm really excited about being at the forefront of bringing that to our users. The way that will manifest, I think, is the fun part. It's the open question, right? Of like, how fast is this going to be and what is this going to look like? And this is what I mean when I say, I think the question we still have to answer is like, what does that human AI interaction actually look like when I sit down to do work? Like, what are the points that we're going to have AI take over? Where are the human checks and balances and controls against it? Particularly when you talk about in an enterprise context, that's something that they're very cautious and concerned about, right? There's, I think, both optimism and excitement, but also a lot of fear over something that maybe you don't fully understand. It can hallucinate and not get things right. And if you're talking about a mission critical workflow, like that's actually a really big problem. And so I think starting to like play with like answers to those questions of like, what are the right workflows for this to be applied to? What does that interaction with the person look like? Who has authority to do what when? What are the controls and checks and balances? Like, I'm really excited for us to work through that with customers over the coming year. And because that's what we're starting to do now.
On the enterprise customer side, you had even mentioned at the beginning that they said, we might not need part two right now. We want to understand what people are doing, how they're doing it. Has there been any surprising resistance to AI that you've heard when you actually talk to enterprises? You mentioned you're often the first one in the walls of the organization. So how do you get that to happen?
There's a big spectrum. I think almost every, Fortune 500 company that we talk to wants to have some kind of AI story. Like they know it's going to be big. They know it's coming. They don't really know what it's going to look like. By the way, I don't think anybody fully does. But they know that like it'll change things and that they want to be on the winning side of it, right? So like they're going to pay attention to it. Then maybe start experimenting in it. But there's also a lot of really unresolved questions, the ones we just mentioned, but also legal questions, compliance questions. It opens up a new risk surface area for them that they might not fully understand. And so we've had enterprise customers who have been everything from like, we have special AI budget where like we want to go, try out the AI things. And like, by the way, I think there's a question, is that good budget? Do you actually want that budget? Like we don't go after that budget, but we'll see. We've had customers where they have AI committees, and any product that has any AI at all gets shut down and automatically disproved. And then you have kind of a spectrum in between, right? And so, the posture I think varies based on like the risk appetite of that company, the kind of industry that they're playing in, the sensitivity of their data, all of that.
I've seen that too when we talk to enterprises and we talk to folks who are eager to adopt AI products, infrastructure products. I've seen everything from, like our mouths are watering and we're looking specifically at anything that has AI in the name to, is there a way to turn this feature off? Like including AI makes everything more complicated in the buying cycle and we don't need that.
We have an AI kill switch.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have an AI kill switch? Yeah. I've seen that a lot. I'm curious if so much is changing right now. And to your point, a lot of these older companies too, their eyes are open and they know that they need to be part of this change. Are there assumptions about workplace knowledge sharing that you think will be obsolete in 5 years? Like things that happen today that you think just will not happen in the future?
I mean, if you think about how most knowledge sharing happens today within a company, it's through either oral tradition or osmosis. Like, think about most of what you learn.
Jennifer consultant.
Right. Well, sure, but that's oral tradition, right? Like maybe I wrote it down, but it's still this idea of like I pass this on to you in a very not scalable way, right? I take a bunch of time to codify what I know how to do. Either I write it down, or I compose it in some kind of spoken word and share it with you, whether it's Zoom or video or you just kind of tapping me on the shoulder. Or I sit around a bunch of people, and like I kind of like pick up from them and learn from them. But there's so much new learning and relearning that's happening in a company in any given day. McKinsey has done studies on this that estimate that about 30% of employees' time is spent just finding and sharing information people need to do their work. We've had customers who have done bottoms up, like detailed time studies, literally like measuring people's time like lawyers, like in 7-minute increments. And they've found that they spend about a day a week just asking and answering questions for each other on how to do something. And like we assume that that's just the natural part of work, that's like a required friction. We're like, well, how else are we going to share this information with other people? It's just, this is part of being human and working in an organization. There's overhead. It just takes time for me to teach you things and for you to figure out who to ask. And like, this is just the natural, kind of state of the world. And so I in many ways say that like, I feel like Scribe is solving a problem that's hiding in plain sight because a day a week of your time, is a really significant time to be wasted just asking and answering questions. And so we said, well, what if you could make that automatic? Like software can solve this problem. What if we can automatically take the best of what anyone knows how to do and give it to the person who needs it to do that process and automatically up level the expertise of everybody on a company? without learning or sharing being separate activities. And so that's if you're future that I'm excited for, because it means we're taking away a bunch of time that's like spent on, meta work. That's not real work. That's like preparation for the work itself. And it's certainly not in service of somebody's highest expression of their time and their talents, right? And instead, we're saying, let's take the best of what you know how to do and like scale it. Let's now let's up level everybody to be as good as you are. Like, that's an amazing world. What if everybody's as good as an expert at something? What does that look like?
I love that. The flip of the obsolescence is, what do you think will remain uniquely human?
I still think there's like some level of communication overhead that humans are always going to have. There's always going to be some level of I have to bring people along in this. Like there's like a coordination cost to organizations, and I'm sure organizational psychologists would articulate this more eloquently than I would. But there's something around human kind of structures and just the cognitive overhead of understanding like where to fit in within a structure and how to make decisions together and do things together that I think even if you have the best of communication software, you're still going to have like these human interaction costs that come to coordination at the end of the day.
I'm going to ask you one final question, since we're talking about humans and leading organizations or how organizations function. I'm curious how you have changed as a leader and as a person since founding Scribe.
Oh, it's an interesting question. Well, my husband would tell you that I've gotten a lot more impatient. And I'll say kind of the flip side to that is, when you're doing a fast growing startup, time is against you. Like time is in many ways your biggest enemy. It's like, it's not competitor. It's not, it's like, it's time at the end of the day, because you have so little of it and you have so much to do so quickly. And especially when you start off in the beginning, you're like, you're default dead. Right. And so, acting with like an extreme degree of urgency on anything. If you were to like sit next to me and we have an idea to do something, like I'm already pulling out my phone and planning and getting stuff done. And like the moment I want to do something, I just do it. And that's kind of how I think you have to operate in this environment. Maybe less so when you're planning like a dinner party with your husband.
No, but that's okay. I mean, the productivity comes with it. And so
we get a lot done. We have 2 small children.
Get a lot done.
We have no other choice.
Mike was telling me, he was like, Jennifer is very productive. She doesn't waste time on the pop culture things that you and I waste time on.
I'll play the more extreme version of that, which is after we did our series B, Red Point Let It, and Logan had me on, a show. And his opener for introducing me was like, this is Jennifer. She's exactly the kind of founder that we like to back. And I'm like feeling good about myself. And then he says, because she doesn't do anything except work. And be with her family. She has no hobbies at all and no understanding of pop culture. I was like, really? That's how you're going to introduce me? Well, this podcast, no one's going to want to listen to this or like ever befriend me again.
No, it's the love of the craft, like you said.
Yes. Yeah. I believe that there are, they're kind of like seasons of life of things that you focus on. The same thing's true, by the way, in like building company or anything that you're doing. Like you have to be very clear about what your priorities are and just do those things. And it's kind of a radical prioritization and saying no to a whole bunch of other things.
Easier said than done. Like, I think you are just better at it than most humans are, but I think that's what we all aspire to. Right?
Yeah. Well, no, it depends what kind of life you want to lead, frankly. But if you want to do something very intensely and see rapid progress in a short period of time, particularly against something that might be hard or like is not commonly done, I think you do have to do that. But that's like a lifestyle choice. You don't have to choose to live your life that way. That's just how I like to live my life.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and for coming on the show. It was great to have you and great to learn more about you and more about Scribe, as always.
Yeah, it was fun to chat. Thanks for having me on.